Right. I'm going to bring in my next guest. This is a story that I cover regularly. It's a story I cover regularly because I believe that it is a gross miscarriage of justice. I believe it is an unsafe conviction. I'm talking about the convictions, multiple, of former neonatal nurse Lucy Letby. And I've talked to a number of brilliant people about this. I'm about to talk to somebody else with a great insight. And let's bring him in. Let me just line everything up. You know what it's like, people, when you're doing all this yourself. Just bear with me. His name is Paul Golden, and here he is. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Good morning, Sonia, and everybody. It's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you with us. Keeping midwives safe leaps out at me immediately. Tells me you're somebody who may have an understanding of this case, Paul.
I hope so. I have a clinical understanding, but also I'm a parent of children born into a neonatal intensive care unit for 3 months. I might even begin there.
Yes, you have a very interesting history. I think it's unique in its own right to approach this case. You studied law, nursing, oriental and natural medicine, which is fantastic. Yeah. Okay. You also studied nursing, then midwifery in the UK. You worked in Australia. You began your clinical career in neonatal units in 1987. I mean, you've traveled around, haven't you? So you have a fairly decent understanding of babies being born prematurely.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, personally, I'll mention, because it's relevant to the case, when people are talking about babies being robust or unexpected deaths, actually all babies are so vulnerable, especially premature and extreme premature. And a baby who's expected to weigh 1.5 kilos or 1.2, actually weighing 800 grams. There's a reason for that. You know, the pregnancy was a challenge for that baby. The placenta probably had some challenges. So I know, just to give the personal thing, when my children who were born at 28 weeks, 1.2 kilos each, fairly robust, a little bit of ventilation support for a few days, did pretty well, had a couple of challenges, including the necrotizing enterocolitis, which means lack of oxygen to the gut and you have to stop feeds. Now, this is talked about a lot in the Lucy Letby case. Not enough, actually, because they kept saying the babies were robust. The main point I want to say of my own children, twin boys, the day they were leaving hospital after 3 months, everyone thought they're very well. They got a chest infection, or one of them did. The one who didn't have an infection picked it up from the one who did, because we didn't isolate that one, and had to be resuscitated, flown by helicopter to an intensive care unit in Cambridge. So these were babies born at 28 weeks at 1.5 kilos. So when we're looking at an 800-gram baby, some of the others were 24 weeks, around that kind of gestation. They might be stable for a few minutes or hours or days, but at any moment they can desaturate.
Right. It's changeable, isn't it? Very vulnerable, very variable. There's so much that I want to talk to you about here, but let's have a look at the lady. Lucy Letby, of course, has been convicted of murdering 7 babies. She's been convicted of the attempted murder of a further 7. She's never going to leave prison. And yet what's really interesting, Paul, is I've been a journalist for an awful long time, and I've never seen so many people who are prepared to put their head above the parapet, like, you know, very known people, politicians, law advisors, even medical people, who are prepared to say there is something wrong with this conviction. And you are one of those. Those. Why did you get interested, other than the fact that you obviously have your own personal experience and you have a knowledge of this arena as well? But what attracted you to it that made you think there's something really wrong here?
At first, before I thought there's something wrong, I thought, oh, another mad, bad person who's doing crazy things. Like there have been a few cases in the history. As soon as I started to look into it, I realized that could be me. That could be any of my colleagues, especially nurses more than doctors, because we're not so well defended and not so able to defend often. And in this case, there is a bit of axe grinding by doctors who had lost an employment grievance case that Lucy took against them.
Right.
So they have a motive against her. She doesn't have a motive against any babies. She has complete dedication, but it could have been me, it could be anyone. And that's why a whole bunch of nurses across the UK have written a petition, sent it into Downing Street, saying they're terrified. And if we have fear-based practice, we don't have the best practice for the person in front of us, whether it's a mother, a baby, or someone else.
And I think It's really important you highlight that, because I've also talked to nurses who are absolutely petrified. And there were also nurses at the Countess of Chester Hospital, where Lucy worked, who wanted to come out in her favour in court, and they were prevented from doing so.
And your previous, I was going to say witnesses, your interviewees, Richard Gill, and I can't remember the name of the other statistician. It's
Nigel. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
Nigel.
yes, yes.
It's so factual. And in contrast to the case was, I call it magical realism, kind of hypnotizing the jury. And I've worked a lot with the judiciary over decades. I've defended nurses, midwives, doctors for 30 plus years. And it appears there may not be malice with the judge, Goss. There may not be malice with the CPS and the prosecuting KC and the police who put the case together. But it's a perfect storm of when good people do nothing, bad things happen. And they just hypnotize the jury into, unlike with your program, there's factual information with the statisticians, with the neonatologists, with me, with others. That's very clear factual evidence that if that was presented to the jury, they would never have found her guilty. There would be such a strong element of doubt.
Right.
And this case wouldn't be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And the massive injustice was that she had to prove her innocence. No, they should prove her guilt. That was never the situation. It was all about, oh, you failed to prove that you're innocent and you didn't call any expert witnesses. She shouldn't have to. And all the other cases I deal with, and there's many cases all the time, they do actually have to show that they're a reasonable, safe, competent practitioner. In a way, they have to prove their innocence. Even though that's wrong, we do need to do that.
100%. And do you feel, though, that she was failed by her defence? She, of course, now has a new defence team and has for the last almost 4 months. Do you feel that it was a failure on their part?
Yeah. Because I do expert witness reports. I've been asked by the police in similar cases. In fact, the Constance Martin case, you remember the baby who died and they were on the run, found in Brighton, and she was sleeping in a tent. And because my narrative wouldn't fit the police narrative, I said, why are you blaming a mother? Because often the police are doing this, and social workers, and there's a tragedy, a grieving parent, like Sally Clark case, the mother of 2 babies who died from sudden infant death syndrome.
Remember it.
The paediatric expert witness said this is 1 in 7 million chance, and he was discredited and taken off the medical register. And this reminds us that expert witnesses have liability. So in this case, Dewey Evans is not an appropriate witness for lots of reasons that have been examined by other people, and his evidence is unsafe, and therefore the conviction is unsafe. And I'm an optimist. She can and will be released, and should be, very soon. And we've learned from the Malkinson case, 17 years with a wrongful conviction. Lucy Letby needs this retrial. I think the tipping point is coming, even with the Court of Appeal judges, with your show, all of us raising the consciousness.
Right, all of it.
I think they're embarrassed a bit, and they even referred to Ravi Jairam, the medical doctor in the neonatal unit, as being a bit of an unreliable witness, and some of the things he said didn't really add up. So if any of the evidence does not add up, is unsafe, the conviction is unsafe.
I completely agree with you. The problem is, and we cover this a lot here, is the problems with the CCRC. Now, that may also improve last week, because Helen Pitcher, and we talked about this on Friday, boss of the CCRC, has now resigned in the wake of the whole Andrew Malkinson scenario. So
she jumped before being pushed, yeah.
That's exactly right. Okay. I mean, they word it very carefully. I don't need to tell you this as somebody who understands law. You know how it works, right? But do you think that things could improve as a consequence of her going regarding Lucy Letby?
Only if we all take action. And action could be individually talking to each other, talking to members of Parliament. David Davis has done a fantastic job with his recent speech, and before the summer recess, he said he was going to look into it. He's even more convinced now after the summer recess, having examined the facts.
Yes.
But here's a unique perspective I have, is I challenge the challenger with education and kindness. So the Criminal Case Review Committee, or I've actually complained to the GMC and to the Police Conduct Committee. They've changed names fairly recently. So we have to go to outside bodies to look at things, but they all fail. And they have chief executives and boards that are failing. We saw this in the post office scandal. So what one has to actually do, and I'm inviting anybody to communicate with me, I have to start an action, a legal action for 3 triple civil things: misfeasance or wrongdoing in a public office, breach of statutory duty, and negligence causing harm. And that's against the independent police complaints and against the GMC, the General Medical Council, because they won't act. They have a very high threshold. In fact, it's weird. For example, in the Lawyers Solicitor Regulatory Council, if we want to complain about the barrister in this case, or the police, they have a really high threshold before they'll even investigate. With nurses, the Nursing Midwifery Council that regulates nurses and midwives has a very low threshold. They treat allegations as evidence. So the only way to go outside these organizations that are dysfunctional, have heads like the CCRC woman, she's getting paid hundreds of thousands a year for doing a bad job, is to go to court and to repeatedly go to court. So my invitation to anybody watching is contact me. Let's collaborate on ideas. It's difficult to, I can be a litigant in person when it's affecting me. So whether the court will accept the case from me, I'm very familiar and happy with filing cases, including the High Court. Some of them get bounced back. One of the magical things is when you file a case, you get, so the threat of litigation gets mediation. You get other organizations on board talking. So even this is a fantastic forum for legal action that you're putting into somebody's mind. Maybe they'll talk to me or somebody else or take some action.
We must put a contact detail for you. We will put we'll put a contact detail for you in the description so people can contact you. Now, for the most part, I think many people tend to agree with you, but there are going to be people saying, no, absolutely not. Emma is one of them in our chat. And she said there is a paper trail, loads of evidence of changing paperwork regarding babies who died. And Emma believes that the problem that we're having with Lucy Letby is if she looked like Rose West, that we would all think she was guilty. But because she's attractive and young, that's why we're swayed. What do you have to think about? What do you have to say about that?
Well, I've heard that from some other sources occasionally. I never considered it. I actually, it just isn't anything to consider. We've focused on the facts. And the facts are, for example, the insulin testing, straight away, is that exogenous from outside the body or was it from inside the body? And the test itself was so unreliable. I'm testing babies' blood gas analysis, arterial blood, venous blood. The machines need to be calibrated. They're not always accurate. There's better and less better machines. In the case of Liverpool having a better machine, the blood should have gone there. The machine report says do not rely on this, and they have relied on it. That becomes circumstantial, that people like Emma then say, there's so much circumstantial evidence, it all adds up to be a conviction.
Right.
If you look at every part of it, there's nothing.
Right.
And there never was.
There is no sort of direct evidence. Nobody has seen anything, right? And those who did,
but even the babies died of natural causes. That was the definition and determination by coroners and pathologists and the parents and the doctors at the time. Then a year or two later, oh, we don't like her, she's bad. Oh, maybe she did something terrible. Dislodging a tube. One point I'm wishing to make is when a baby desaturates, so the oxygen level's gone down, the alarm goes, you go to the baby, you hesitate because they might self-correct. So you wait a few seconds. And we even have a chart. Did they self-correct within 5 or 10 seconds? And each baby's got a different parameter that will allow them. So when it's, oh, I saw Lucy standing by the bedside doing nothing when a baby's dying, it's like you can pause, observe, how's the nose, how's the lips, how's the chest?
Right, but it was immediately held against her, right, for following actual protocol.
Yeah. It's not always the baby that has a problem, it's the machine that's alarming for no reason, or it's not picking up the signal clearly. So you observe, you check, you might do a little flick of the feet or blow on the baby, or you have to call big resus and everybody comes. But you're making an assessment, and that human factor takes a few seconds. It could be 1 second, it could be 5.
Right, got you. So you have previously called for a comprehensive public inquiry. What do you think of the Thirlwell inquiry? For those who don't know, a bit of backstory, the Thirlwell inquiry, I think launched, was it last September? And it's at Liverpool Town Hall. And obviously they are only looking at why something like this could have happened. In fact, Lady Thirlwell started off the inquiry really by attacking those who were questioning the convictions, right? What are your thoughts about the Thirlwell inquiry? We're going to get to the truth. How can we?
It's a mixed answer, good and bad. So the good is I agree with you. She started attacking people, including like me, Richard Gill, neonatal specialists. There was one called Dr. Hall who sat in court every day, ready to be called by the defence. And she's saying nobody's got a proper informed opinion. Nobody heard and saw the case. There are people like him who sat in court. Others read transcripts or the journalist report. So we have a very valid input, and hence I wrote the book. I researched it for a year. The good things that have come out of it is accidental evidence. And this happens in any case I've taken. You get managers blaming each other and saying inconsistent things. So the truth will come out. So when Dr. Ravi Jairam says something, or Dr. Stephen Breary says something, and it's not credible, it's not consistent, it's not having any factual basis to it, you realize that this was relied on in court for her conviction. So that's accidental benefit of the Thirlwell inquiry. But the bad stuff is it's very much the emperor's clothes. If everybody agrees the emperor looks wonderful in this clothes that they're not wearing,
Right.
if you have such a narrow remit for it, it needs to be a wide remit. How and why did babies die then, even before then and after then? Why were the doctors doing 2 ward rounds a week instead of 2 a day? I've never known that. I've worked in probably 30, 40 neonatal units in Australia, New Zealand, the UK. I've also worked in Sri Lanka, India, Vietnam, other countries, Mexico.
So you've seen a very wide range of
Yeah.
neonatal care, haven't you? That's interesting in itself. Yes.
In all units. I was in Sweden. I was so impressed by the presence, the dedication. Most units have an amazing quality of love. And that's with people like Lucy, the nurses that support her. Most of the mid-level doctors are there 24 hours. And they've got a great commitment technically and emotionally. And they make relationships with the parents. And when people criticize Lucy for being overly emotional, it's a very incredibly, you're holding a baby who's going to die. You know, and some of them grow up and come back and visit you. I've actually had, because I'm a midwife as well, I'm sometimes having the children, or including the daughters of the mothers I looked after 27 years ago. 30 years ago.
Wow. I mean, the thing is, people don't realize how deep this goes. I know one of the things that people get concerned about is that we're disrespecting the parents of the babies, but it's not that. I think we disrespect them by not giving them the full truth. That's what I think is a disrespect. What do you think?
Thank you for that point. I totally agree with you, but I go even further. I have not clients, people come to me, I do voluntary work for their defense. And they're so shy and timid and the rabbit in the headlights. They're like, oh, I don't want to make a fuss. And they don't see the bigger picture is the whole public. So a criminal case is about the whole public. If we don't have a justice system that we can depend on, rely on, and I think we can accept its inconsistencies to some extent, whereas the court seems to say, we've got to be consistent. If we've made a mistake, keep with it. Don't change it. It's like, no, if you've made a mistake, as we saw in Birmingham 6, Guildford 4, and all the other, not only the 500 criminal miscarriages of justice that are known about, that Exeter University studied and published about, I go much further and say the regulatory bodies like the General Medical Council, the Nursing Midwifery Council, and others, they have wrongful convictions all the time that have a similar impact to a criminal one, but we cannot appeal them to the CCRC because they're not criminal. We can only go to the High Court, and the High Court often does a balancing and say, oh, we know they're bad, but we'll let them carry on.
That's a bind, isn't it?
Yeah, they're enabling the bad processes.
Absolutely, they are. And obviously, part of the problem that we have, and we talk about it a lot around here, is that in England, I'm sure this is all the same all around the world, but this is my experience. In England, when we make mistakes, big judicial mistakes, we are so loath and reluctant to then address them because it seems to be, like this is such a shame on our establishment. And there is that reluctance. Your book that you talk about, by the way, is Lucy Letby, Innocent Miscarriages of Justice. Where is it available, Paul?
Both of them are on Kindle. If you want a more ethical platform, Gumroad is there. And I also...
that's the link I'll put in the description on Road. Yes, please. That's brilliant because I think
the Kindle because it's easy. They're ebooks and paperback.
It's really important what you've done, and I do really appreciate it. So really, the bottom line is this deserves a retrial, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It could even be such an unsafe conviction that it could be quashed. But if they started a retrial, a judge would then announce, and the previous judge ignored the warning from the judge who said this expert witness is not credible, should not rely on him. And he did rely on him and said he was credible. And that's how the conviction happened. So how did Judge Goss allow that? We should criticize judges. There's a God complex with doctors and lawyers, partly because they used to use another language, Greek, then Latin, and they dress up in funny things. And even the judges look up to the doctors too much and revere them. Oh, a judge said something bad about Lucy, therefore it must be true. Lucy could say something bad about the doctors. I made an error there. And it's not true. That's just because there's a God complex of us as the public, and the people that criticize this case are like, oh, but we rely on the doctors, or we rely on the judge or the lawyers. And we shouldn't. We should challenge ourselves, challenge each other. You and I can question, challenge. We can disagree. And
Of course
this is a
we
beautiful,
can.
healthy thing. Because in our families we do it. Why can't we do it in public work?
Exactly.
So, yes.
And a healthy society should be able to question decisions and accept when we make mistakes. That should happen. But at this moment in time, I am deeply, deeply concerned that she's just going to spend the rest of her life just fading away inside without any. And there is enough to look again at this. I've covered enough criminal cases, Paul, to know there is absolutely enough to look again at this as well. What do you absolutely want people to know who may be on the fence a little bit about this before you leave us today?
Focus on facts, not on storytelling. So when the lawyers presented information that they said was facts, was it really? We should always test, weigh the facts, especially against some opposing facts. Which one is heavier? Which one's more true? Which one's more accurate? What's more reliable evidence? And go with that. And in this case, all their evidence has been discredited. The door swipe going in and out, the complete reverse. It shows a police department that didn't have much money, it was failing, like the hospital was failing. Suddenly it gets millions. The defense lawyers got much more money than, got much less money, 1.5 million compared to 2.5 million for the prosecution. So, they've spun their facts, and we're so used to fake news and spinning as a normal thing. Really focus on facts.
Really good to have you with us. Thank you so much for contacting me, Paul. I really appreciate it. Please keep me up to speed with your thoughts on this as we progress, because I really want to, I want to actually get up to the Thirlwell inquiry, because I want to see at firsthand what's taking place there, because it is deeply concerning. And obviously, when you have the sort of gatekeepery type journalists in the mainstream media, you're like absolutely insistent that everything is right. But the thing is, our job as a journalist is not just to insist that everything's right, it's to look at the facts and the evidence. And it is absolutely clear and apparent there is enough evidence there to force a retrial. Enough evidence. Do you think it's going to happen?
I think it will this year or next year. I'm a real optimist that we can have a tipping point and it will come sooner rather than later. And if we look at the Post Office, they had a proper inquiry, loads of really useful evidence about leadership failings, reputational protection. Same things have happened in this, but they're not looking at it widely enough. They've made a narrow thing of, blame this victim, and made such a victim out of her. So, yeah, I'm an optimist. It's going to happen.
Sounds great. Everybody, this is Paul Golden. I will put a link in the description to his book. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Good luck to you, Sonia. Well done. Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Right. Yes, Emma, I take your... Listen, the great thing about our show is we allow difference of opinion. Right? Emma absolutely is of a different opinion, and Emma is entitled to that different opinion, right? In the same way as other people in the comments think that Paul is spot on and right. Katie says, thank you, Paul. Cheers, Paul. Thanks for a great interview, says Steve. You're very welcome. Steve is somebody who informs me a lot to do with the Lucy Letby case, so thank you very much. I think
it's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.